Hi everyone. Today we'll be doing our course review, going back and reminding ourselves what we set out to do at the beginning of the semester. And in doing so, kind of look at the different ways we thought about social theory and then reference those ways to what we've been doing throughout the semester. On top of that, we'll be looking at kind of our class as a whole when it comes to the different readings and how the readings relate to each other. And then we'll conclude the presentation today by me just briefly addressing the final project of the semester. So, just to get started, when we first met, I believe it was our second class period, we broke down social theory in reference to three different metaphors. The first of which being a lens. So basically, we can say social theory operates as a lens to give us a new way to see the social world. Now, this new way of seeing the world connects to the different types of theory, the different themes of theory. So, we had a few different theories that gave us a new way to see social change. We had a few different theories that gave us a new way to see how social control works. And so that's what we're looking at there. Each theory provided us a new way to see the social world. Going back to social change, we saw a theory of change through Marx, showing us how new forms of material goods, new forms of technology kind of push everything forward. And then we talked about Durkheim, how different cultural ways start to come together to promote social change. And then we also can talk about how different senses of self, how different identities emerge. And Adler gave us one way to see this with the gloried self. And then at the end of the semester, we saw another way to see how identities emerge and the Melio piece. So, in addition to looking at social theory as a lens, we talked about social theory as a tool. Here we're talking about how each theory gave us a new way to understand the social world, to not only see it in a new way, but also to think about it in a new way. So regarding the lens, for the most part, that ties into those 5 reading reactions we did and how we broke down the different readings throughout the semester with respect to a what, a how, and a why. With the tool metaphor, we're primarily looking at kind of the different actions going on within the frameworks and how those actions are promoted by social structural forms or how they're promoted by actions of free will, elements of agency. So here's kind of a deeper critical level that allows us to not only see things in a new way, but to kind of understand what we're seeing. And so here we can think about the 2 book reports. We looked at the elements of structure and agency behind self-presentation in the Goffman book. Kind of when we present ourselves as who we really are, or when we present ourselves perhaps not in a full disclosure in the factors that motivate us to do kind of one way or another. So Goffman kind of shows us behind self-presentation, we do have agency, but also there are structural forces such as culture, such as groups that can influence our self-presentation strategies. Although the strategies themselves are elements of agency, our free will. And so we can look at structure and agency again behind social organization. And this relates to the second book, the Fine book that we looked at, social order in restaurants, and looking at how, again, different social structural forms come into play, but also so do different forms of agency. So again, time is a big social structural force for Fine, and to try to save time, to navigate that issue of time, you can practice your free will and agency and do various strategies so you can get ahead of time by planning ahead, or you can save time by taking shortcuts. So again, we start to really understand kind of what's going on top of understanding things in kind of in a new way of perspective. So overall, those were the main two metaphors we looked at: seeing things in a new way and understanding things in a new way with respect to what goes on in our social world. And then we talked about the river metaphor, how we started out with the classical theorist and then moved to the middle year theorist. Then we concluded the semester by looking at contemporary theories. And to understand the contemporary theories, whether it be Sasson or D'Amelio, or the Adlers that we talked about as the legacy piece of the middle years. So to understand all those contemporary theorists, you need to understand who came before them, whether it be the classical theorist in Europe or the middle year theorist in the United States, or even the middle year theorist over back in Europe. So the direct influences we talked about were kind of Marx and his neo-Marxists, such as Gramsci, Benjamin, Arnowitz and Afazio, D'Amelio. And then also we talked about the Cooley and Mead kind of American middle year social thought influence that you saw go out through various threads, including Goffman, including Gary Allen Fine as an example. So nevertheless, we can see those direct influences, but indirectly we can also see influences. So we see Weber come to the surface in a lot of theories, including Gramsci and D'Amelio. And both Gramsci and D'Amelio, although they are neo-Marxist, they include Weber's ideas by highlighting the role of social status, the social status of intellectuals for Gramsci, or the social status of one's gay identity when it comes to D'Amelio. And Durkheim, we saw, again, a lot of indirect influences. Looking at Goffman, he's continuing the Cooley and Mead influence, but we see an indirect influence by Durkheim with his focus on culture and how culture defines normality. And then Benjamin, another neo-Marxist, but again, his focus on culture can be traced back to Durkheim. Thus, Durkheim indirectly influenced the neo-Marxist Benjamin. Usually what we do when we're meeting face to face for this class period, I have up on the board all the different connections, both direct and indirect, when it comes to visualizing our theory as river metaphor. So what I do is have the classical theorist at the top, then the contemporary theorist at the bottom. So going kind of up, down, that's your timeline. So the older classical theorist at the top, the middle year theorist in the middle, and then at the bottom, the newer contemporary theorist that we read in the semester. And so what I do is I have all the lines drawn out on the chalkboard, but I leave the names blank. And then I have you guys get into small groups and try to guess, who is where in terms of the river. So you try to figure out, seeing all the different types of influences in terms of who's influencing how many people, whether it be a direct or indirect influence, and kind of where they are in terms of the history. You try to kind of figure out who goes where. So, at the top, it'd be easy because you recognize the four classical theorists are going to be the four people at the top. But of those four, you need to figure out kind of who is going where. And Marx would be an easy one because we've seen a lot of neo-Marxists this semester. So the solid lines represent the direct influences. And so we see a direct influence to a lot of people, where the dotted lines are indirect influences. So there's a lot of influence going on, but more indirect influence than direct. And so Marx would probably be the easiest, and maybe Zimmel, because he hasn't really influenced too many people. There is a connection indirectly to Benjamin that we see, and then kind of the other two, Durkheim and Weber. And then sometimes you kind of figure out the classical theorist that you don't know when you start to fill in the blanks for the other people. So, nevertheless, this is kind of an activity that I have you guys do to kind of think about all the different readings we did. 14 different theorists in total, I believe, and how they all kind of indirectly or directly relate to each other. And you kind of visualize that, and this is kind of neat to see, but also you visualize it in terms of recognizing our metaphor theory as a river. And then look at Cooley Mead. They're in the middle there, and they're not directly or indirectly influenced by anybody. So none of the classical theorists are connected to Cooley and Mead because, again, Cooley and Mead were starting their own thing. They were kind of rejecting the classical macro-oriented structural focus theory and started their own theories. And so although you don't see anybody influencing Cooley and Mead, you see their influence directly on Goffman, on the Adlers, but also you can see Cooley and Mead indirectly influencing other American theorists such as D'Amelio, Du Bois, Gary Allen Fine. And then just kind of jump around a little bit. You can see Du Bois influenced Goffman in terms of kind of that negative social status, but also you see Du Bois influencing Sasson, and that was that kind of community sociology focus that you saw in Sasson's work. Although Sasson's a neo-Marxist, directly influenced by Marx and Engels, you do see that indirect influence by Du Bois. So overall, you see kind of all the classical theorists, and the person who has the most influence, albeit direct influence, is Weber. So you see in different neo-Marxists such as D'Amelio, Arnowitz and Fazio, Gramsci, a Weberian influence. You see Du Bois using Weber, Goffman using Weber, Gary Allen Fine using Weber, kind of that focus on social status within the restaurants, within the kitchen environment. So you definitely, Marx and Engels in our class, just the way it was organized, had that direct influence more than other people, but Weber indirectly is more influential. And that kind of holds true, like I talked about at the beginning of the semester, although Weber's name is not as well known as Durkheim and Marx. His influence in social thought is stronger compared to Durkheim and Marx. So overall, it's just kind of, for me at least, it's kind of fun to look at. And for you, it's just kind of interesting to see kind of all the readings that you went through this semester. Sometimes we always focus on the end of the semester. We kind of forget what we've done to lead up to this point. So it's just this nice visual to represent the metaphor of river, but also it's a nice visual to kind of see what you've been doing throughout the entire semester and how what you've been doing has related to what you did kind of previously. So we'll leave that there, and now we'll turn some attention to the final project. So we can turn our attention to the final project of the semester. So, I don't want to read the directions word for word, but kind of do an overview of everything and throw in some advice or some tips along the way. So overall, what I'm asking you to do is take 2 different theories throughout the semester, and one preterm theory, which I consider to be Cooley and Mead and all the readings we had before, and also one post-midterm, which would include the Adlers and all the readings we had after the Adlers. So that's kind of the distinction we make between the pre-midterm and the post-midterm, the 2 categories of readings you're going to be using for your project. So for each category, the pre-midterm, the post-midterm, you select one theory. And with your theories, you can create either a single visual representation that captures both theories in a single image, or your visual can be two separate visuals where the imagery that you're using captures one theory in one visual and then the second theory in a second visual. So that's up to you in terms of how you go about doing the visual representation. And basically what I'm looking for is the visual representation to be on a standard sheet of paper. So, it's going to be a little bit different doing this virtually compared to in class. If we did this in class, I would have you put your sheet of paper or your sheet of papers on the overhead projector and we would look at it in class as you talked about it. But since we're doing this virtually now, basically, you can find your own way of uploading your visual or your visuals in the our D2L class. So, you could put it in a PowerPoint. That'd be one way you could easily do it. And then just upload kind of the PowerPoint into the D2L site. You can take a picture of it, with your computer, take a picture of it with your phone, or, any way you could take a picture and then kind of upload that to a computer. Then you can upload your document to our D2L site. So, if you have any questions about doing the uploading of the project, let me know. But I trust you that you guys have the, creativity, or at least, the practical know-how to do this. And I don't know, overcomplicate it, but if you do have any questions about uploading the visuals, please let me know. So in addition to the visuals, you'll be doing a two-page description of your project. So basically, this is what you'd be presenting to the class if you're doing this in class. You talk about the two different theories that you're using, what those theories are about, and then how the visual ties into those ideas into theories. So basically, think of the two-page description as basically describing to the viewer, what your visual representations are and how they reflect the ideas and the theories you selected. So the points will be allocated in terms of the two-page description being 30 points. So make sure you're really kind of describing for the reader, what's going on in your visuals and how it relates to your theories. And then also talk about, also in terms of the point allocation, 30 points are allocated for the visual itself. So, what I'm looking for in terms of point-wise and the visual is effort. I understand that, our artistic ability will vary across the board. And I'm not going to, take points away just because you're not perhaps the most creative person in the world. But as long as I see the effort is there and that you're thinking about kind of what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then those points will be easy to get. And then again, for the points for the two-page description, just make sure that you're unpacking your ideas, making it clear to the reader kind of what's going on in your visual project. So 30 points allocated for the visual, for the two-page description, again, both of which you'll be uploading to our D2L section. The project is worth 60 points total then. And otherwise, I guess my advice would be, choose theories that you found to be perhaps more interesting or perhaps more engaging. Like anything else, when you do this project and you're working with readings, when you're working with ideas that you liked, that you found to be interesting, the project will be much more interesting and probably create a lot more imagination when it comes to creating your visuals. compared to if you're working with theories that you really don't have a connection to. So I'll leave that there for now. And as always, be in touch if you have any questions or concerns about the final project.